Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents So Much Things to Say, The Oral History of Bob Marley, by Roger Steffens. Introduction by Linton Kwesi Johnson. Read by Roger Steffens. Livocation. To the ineffable C.C. Smith, co-founder of The Beat magazine, devoted friend and partner, without whose efforts on my behalf this book would never have existed, and to my beloved wife Mary and our children Kate and Devon, whose constant support and tolerant overstanding are a gift from Jah. There are no facts in Jamaica, only versions. Old folk saying. Introduction. The People Speak by Linton Kwesi Johnson. In an essay I wrote on the lyrics of Bob Marley's Exodus, voted Album of the 20th Century by Time magazine, I said of his lyrical genius that it was based on his ability to translate the personal into the political, the private into the public, the particular into the universal. Genius, it can be argued, is not merely an exceptional personal attribute, it is historical, in the sense that it becomes manifest when there is a conjunction of the biographical and the historical. The second half of the 1970s, the period when Bob Marley began to reap the rewards of his long apprenticeship as a musician, was a time of turbulence not only in Jamaica, but around the globe. The Cold War was at its most intense. Proxy wars were being waged between East and West in developing world countries. Anti-colonial wars were still being fought in Africa. There were anti-imperialist struggles taking place in South America. Jamaica was on the brink of all-out civil war as the opposition, aided and abetted by the CIA, sought to wrest power from Michael Manley's democratic socialist government. Bob Marley almost lost his life during that conflict. His music is resonant of that period. It reflects the zeitgeist. At the apotheosis of his career, he had become a kind of Che Guevara of popular culture. I have the dubious distinction of having written a critique of Marley's rise to fame at a pivotal time in his career. As a fan of the Wailers' triumvirate of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Bunny Wailer, I was deeply disappointed when they went their separate ways. Then, on top of that, Marley was being hailed in the rock music press as the new King of Rock, following the release of his first solo album, Natty Dread. As far as I was concerned, that was a travesty, and I was not alone in harboring such sentiments. Bob Marley was, after all, a top-ranking Jamaican reggae artist who belonged to the world of black music and was being appropriated by the white rock world. In the article I wrote titled Roots and Rock, The Marley Enigma, published in Race Today in October 1975, I not only criticized the way Marley was being marketed, I laid the blame at the doorstep of Chris Blackwell, founder of Island Records. Back then, I was a 23-year-old sociology undergraduate, and I had just published my second book of poems, Dread, Beat, and Blood. 3 years later, I was signed to Island Records by Blackwell, and a year after that, by Marley, to Tuff Gong. With the benefit of hindsight, I can say that my analysis of the marketing strategy was more or less correct, even though the sentiments were misplaced. When it became clear that Bob Marley would not recover from the cancer he was battling, the newly elected Jamaican government, led by Edward Seaga, awarded him the Order of Merit, the nation's highest civilian award. It was in recognition not only of Marley's enormous popularity in Jamaica, but also of the kudos he had brought to the nation by his achievements abroad. No other Jamaican has done more to boost the brand name Jamaica. As reggae music's greatest ambassador, Marley made an enormous contribution to its globalization and its impact on popular culture around the world. Since his demise, he has grown in stature from superstar to legend to iconic status, a remarkable achievement for someone from such a humble background. The astute, and at times obscene marketing of Marley as a brand cannot detract from the fact that no other recording artist in the late 20th century, in any genre, has had the global reach and influence that Marley has, continuing into this millennium. The Rastafarian soul rebel, armed with his distinctive voice, a guitar, a great backing band, and fine backing vocals, was a man on a mission to challenge the isms and schisms of principalities and powers as he fought against spiritual wickedness in high and low places. His legacy of catchy, danceable songs of defiance, resistance, rebellion, love, and hope continues to reverberate around the world. His lyrical and melodic genius guarantees the contemporaneity of his music. What kind of man and musician was Nesta Robert Marley? Many books have been written about him, including a Marley reader for the Academy. He has appeared in fiction, too. What makes Roger Steffens' So Much Things to Say, the oral history of Bob Marley, unique is that the author does not present a portrait of the artist through his own lens, but instead presents us with a collage of impressions seen through the eyes of others. For many years, Steffens has traveled the world telling Marley's story with his illustrated Life of Bob Marley lecture. Here he allows those who knew Marley to give their versions. Roger Steffens, writer, broadcaster, and photographer, a respected scholar of reggae, and renowned archivist specializing in Bob Marley recordings and ephemera, has put together 75 interviews with people close to Marley who speak candidly about what they witnessed of the singer's life and times. The respondents range from people who knew Marley intimately to those who crossed paths with him, including family, friends, musicians, record company personnel, journalists, photographers, and filmmakers. The evidential nature of this book, with at times conflicting narratives, guarantees a riveting listen. Some of the testimonies confirm what was already known. Some offer different versions. Some contest myths about Marley. Others say more about the witness than the man. There are some startling revelations and contentious claims. We hear from Clement Coxsone Dodd about the young Marley's time at Studio One, the reputedly mafia-connected Danny Sims on his dealings with Marley and Johnny Nash, Bunny Wailer on his friend's composition technique, Beverly Kelso, an original Wailer, on the relationship between Rita Marley and Bob, Joe Higgs on his schooling of the original Wailers and Marley's character, Dermot Hussey, Jamaican broadcaster and musicologist, on the interview about the breakup of the Wailers that Marley wanted destroyed. There are interviews with all of the original Wailers. Other voices include Cedella Booker, Marley's mother, Cindy Breakspear, former beauty queen and mother of Damien Jr. Gong Marley, Alan Skill Cole, Marley's close friend, Third World's Cat Coeur, and Rastafarian guru Mortimer Plano. Steffens sometimes makes editorial interventions, introducing a speaker or providing context for what is being said. He rarely opines, allowing his witnesses to tell their stories in their own words, structured chronologically from Marley's childhood to his demise. The overall impression we get of Marley is that of a man of some complexity, taciturn and jovial by turns, worldly and spiritual, a sleeping lion capable of violent rage, a peacemaker, a ladies' man, and a man of prodigious generosity. The most striking observation that emerges from several witnesses is how serious Marley was about his art, his single-mindedness and his consummate professionalism. Marley's story is a poignant one of humble origins, privation, struggle, survival, trials and tribulations, triumph, and tragedy. Preface. There are, it is reported, over 500 books written in many languages and published all over the world about the reggae king. So, why this book, and why now? What's left to say? To provide the proper answer, allow me to explain how this music lover became so deeply involved in researching Bob Marley's unprecedented life and impact on the world. I have been a fan of the Wailers' works since discovering them through a revelatory 1973 Rolling Stone article by Michael Thomas, who said that reggae music crawls through your bloodstream like some vampire amoeba from the psychic rapids of Upper Niger consciousness. That unforgettable sentence sent me rushing out the door of my Berkeley apartment to find Catch a Fire, the Wailers' first international album on Island Records. The following evening I saw The Harder They Come, Jamaican director Perry Hensel's exuberant film, which brought the imagery of reggae and Rastafari to the outside world. My life has never been the same since. As a fan, I sought out others who had caught what Peter Tosh called reggae-myelitis. Among the first teacher-mentors I discovered was a man from Kingston named Ruel Mills, who had a small record shop on Fillmore Street in San Francisco called Trenchtown Records. There he introduced me to the likes of Count Ossie and the mystic revelation of Rastafari, Ross Michael and the Sons of Negus, Alton Ellis, the Techniques, Slim Smith, and a host of obscure singers and musicians whose ethereal works moved my heart and elevated my consciousness. In 1976, after moving to Los Angeles, my wife Mary and I traveled to Jamaica hoping to find records I had only read about, mainly in British magazines such as Black Music and in occasional Jamaican publications such as Swing magazine. We arrived the week that Prime Minister Michael Manley declared a national state of emergency, throwing the opposition into prison with no charges and placing tanks on all the island's crossroads. I felt like I was back in Saigon during the Tet Offensive. We spent most of our time in the bucolic area around Lucy on the northwest coast of the island, but we just had to go to Kingston to check out the Wailers record shop, as well as Randy's and Joe Gibbs's emporiums on the main square of Parade. Our first stop was on a deserted back street where Marley had a tiny shack. There, within 2 minutes on the ground, one of the biggest reggae stars at the time tried to pick my pocket. A half hour later, we found ourselves in Jimmy Cliff's house with some of the most important musicians of the era, revealing the best and worst of life and yard, as the locals referred to their island home. 2 years later, I met Hank Holmes, an avid collector of omnivorous tastes, who had amassed over 8,000 ska, rocksteady, and reggae records without leaving Los Angeles. We became instant friends. I thought, with his vast collection and knowledge, we could do a great radio show together, as there was no reggae on the air in L.A. at the time. We fought for a year unsuccessfully to find a station willing to let us reveal the great wealth of music being created just south of the U.S. Finally, we found a spot on a tiny NPR station in Santa Monica, an L.A. beach city, called KCRW. It had only 110 watts at the time, but there were great plans afoot for it to grow. The station itself was in a tiny converted classroom in a junior high school, across the street from the license holder, Santa Monica College. KCRW was always desperate for monetary support. During the first fundraising drive while we were there, they gave us an extra hour to beg for money, 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon. That day, we made history, amassing in those few hours what the station's previous fundraising drive had made in 10 days. Immediately, our airtime was doubled to 4 hours a week, and our Reggae Beat show became, according to the L.A. Weekly, the most popular non-commercial radio show in the city. Hank decided not to do any of the fascinating storytelling he did in private, preferring to let the music speak for itself. So it fell on me to do the interviews and study up on things I could add to make our broadcasts stronger. Hank had such a stupendously deep collection that there was hardly an artist who came through our gates who didn't discover records of their music that they had never seen before, primarily Peter Tosh, who became one of our biggest early supporters. The program was the first in a series of events, each building on the one before, that caused me to interact with virtually all of the major players in the Wailers' careers. Our first musical guest was Bob Marley. We had only been on the air for 6 weeks when Island Records called and asked if we'd mind going on the road for a couple of weeks on his survival tour. It was one of the most important events in my life, as we shared a wide variety of experiences, both public and private, with Marley and his band. We told Bob about our show, and he urged us to remember that reggae music was for headucation, not just jollification. Ironically, the happiest person on the road with us was the bus driver. He got to sweep up all the roaches at the end of each evening, and some nights he told us he'd go home with several ounces of discarded herb. During this period, Bob asked me to arrange for showings of the 2 most important films of his life at that point, Jeff Walker's documentary and film of the Smile Jamaica concert, and the assassination attempt on Bob's life that preceded it. and the One Love peace concert film Heartland Reggae. He had seen neither of them before. During both screenings, it was instructive to watch Bob watching Bob, and some of his reactions, described in this book, are sure to be provocative. His final show in L.A. was a benefit concert at the Roxy, and Hank and I were among the very few allowed into the show's sound check that afternoon. Bob spent close to an hour singing something over and over again that we'd never heard before about redemption. It would be the last time we would see him before he passed a year and a half later from melanoma. Peter Tosh came through a few months later, saying grudgingly that at least Bob's death would make room for other artists to be noticed, a belligerent stance that cost him the support of many of his fans. But he had a very warm and humorous side to him, too, and over the next 7 years we grew close, and I interviewed him several times for Reggae Beat and also for a cable TV show that producer-director Chili Charles had started called L.A. Reggae. I would get several calls a year from Peter in various far-flung locations, asking for copies of this or that record. He didn't have any of his own history, he explained sadly. It had all been stolen or begged off. Just before his murder in September 1987, he called asking for a copy of Here Comes the Judge to remake for a sequel to his then-new album No Nuclear War. Bunny Wailer came into my life later. A recluse since his departure from the group in 1973, I first met him at the Sunsplash Festival in Montego Bay in 1985 and gave him 11 90-minute tapes of old Wailer singles. The following year, he called me and asked me to be the publicist for what would be his first foreign show after 13 on-island years of exile from overseas stages. That show was held in L.A., and he came on the Reggae Beat the next day for a 4-hour special. In 1990, Bunny again called, asking this time if I would be willing to co-write his autobiography. I readily accepted, and requested that I bring along my dear friend Leroy Jody Pearson, a brilliant blues guitarist and historian, and founder of the Nighthawk record label, which had already released some of Bunny's music. He agreed, and Leroy and I went on to spend 3 weeks locked in a hotel room in Kingston in October 1990, compiling 64 hours of interviews about the entire history of his relationship with Bob and Peter. Sadly, Bunny has never allowed that book to be published. 10 years of work and 1,800 pages of transcripts of the history that every Wailers fan is yearning to read remains in limbo. Nonetheless, Leroy and I combined over 30 years of research to complete our 2005 book, Bob Marley and the Wailers, The Definitive Discography, to date the only true discography ever compiled for any Jamaican artist. In 1984, NARIS, the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, asked me to organize and chair a Reggae Grammy Committee, which I did for the next 27 years. That same year, I was invited to do a presentation of unreleased Marley films and videos as part of the National Video Festival at the American Film Institute. This drew positive reviews in local press and led to invitations from colleges and then clubs to do it again. My multimedia program, The Life of Bob Marley, has been presented over 500 times all over the world since then, from the outback of Australia to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, bringing the words and works of reggae's prophet to the far reaches of the globe. This has led to hundreds of encounters with those who interacted with Bob personally, each of whose stories I taped or filmed for posterity. Many of these appeared in The Beat magazine, which was co-founded by me and C.C. Smith in 1981 and lasted for 28 years. Each May, I edited a Bob Marley Collector's Edition, which included writing by some of reggae's finest observers, all working for free for the love of the music. The Wailers Band and I have remained good friends for almost 4 decades now. In 2013, the Family Man Barrett-led Wailers invited me to go on the road with them for 2 months as their opening act as they played the entire Survival album live. I slept on the floor of their bus throughout January and February, working in some of the coldest cities in North America, showing pictures I took on the original tour and telling of the crucial importance of the album and explaining its lyrics. It left me with a lasting and enormous respect for the road life that these intrepid warriors have committed themselves to at great personal cost carrying Bob's timeless creations to a hungry younger generation. Back in 2002, I approached Norton's Jim Mars with an idea for an oral history of Bob Marley. My original conception was for the complete transcripts of some 80 crucial interviews to be published in full, so that readers would know each person's whole story in their own words and see the context in which each question was answered. I wanted to present the raw material of history for writers in the future to have full access to. I had nearly completed the book by 2005 when disaster struck. Having been born in 1942, I'm definitely part of the techno-igno generation, and when my computer suffered an unfixable crash, I lost everything: the manuscript, the interview transcripts, and all my notes. I went into a 2-year funk and couldn't face starting from scratch again. When Jim came looking for the book in 2007, I had to confess what had happened. I am eternally grateful for his patience and understanding, and he urged me to get started again. A few years later, I sent him about 80% of the book. He wrote back that the folks at Norton had decided it would be far more readable if I broke up the voices into topics, in the manner of the superb biography Bill Graham Presents by Robert Greenfield. With a heavy heart, realizing how much more work still lay before me, I agreed. Now I see that Jim's decision was the right one in so many ways, and I'm grateful for him standing by me with infinite patience and belief in the project. In 2015, Jim passed the project over to Norton's meticulous senior editor Tom Mayer, himself a former reggae broadcaster in California and at Columbia. So, to answer the questions posed at the beginning, I have compiled this book with the knowledge that there are several superb books that deal with various portions of Bob's life, and I do not feel the urge to repeat previous works. Cedella Booker tells a mother's story about his childhood. Her ghostwriter, Tony Winkler, who told me once that he never listens to reggae and only likes classical music, helmed a tome that is curiously devoid of music, but does give valuable information about Bob's youth. For his years in Delaware, Christopher John Farley's Before the Legend fills in many blanks of that pre-island period. One of my very favorite books is John Missouri's brilliant Wailing Blues, the story of Bob Marley's Wailers, which is basically the autobiography of family man Barrett and his drummer brother Carlton, the very heart of the Wailers' sound since 1970. Every song done by Bob since then is deconstructed in this invaluable book. My friend Stephen Davis was one of the first out of the gate with Bob Marley, which gives a fine overview of Bob's life and remains justifiably in print after more than 30 years. Photographer Kate Simon covers the mid-70s years in her massive Rebel Music, which is filled with extraordinarily intimate photographs and reminiscences by several of those with whom she toured. Likewise, Chris Salowich's instructive 50th birthday coffee table book, Songs of Freedom, gives much detail on Bob's childhood and European touring. Vivian Goldman's exhaustive eyewitness account of the making of Marley's Album of the Century, The Book of Exodus, is a major work of scholarship. With all of these already on the shelves, what's left to add? With so much things to say, named after one of Bob's most evocative compositions, I have set out to illuminate with first-person depth the parts of his life that have been only partially explored. My main topics include his pre-recording years in Kingston, the backstage reality of Coxsone Dodd Studio One, his exile from Kingston in 1966 and 1967, the Danny Sims-Johnny Nash maneuverings of the late 60s and early 70s, the perilous history of the group's relationship with Lee Perry and the disquieting reasons for their split, the breakup of the group in 1973, the assassination attempt in 1976, an inquiry into whether the CIA was complicit in the attempt on his life, the controversial events leading to the One Love Peace concert, his trips to Africa, including shocking behind-the-scenes stories of Gabon and Zimbabwe, and the history of his fatal cancer and its treatment. Over the past 37 years, scores of his friends, associates, and family members have shared with me intimate details of their interactions with the Reggae King. Now you can read their revelations, too. There are many contradictory accounts, Among them, the controversy surrounding the recording of the Wailers' first record, Simmer Down, and the circumstances surrounding the wedding of Bob Marley and Rita Anderson. Let history decide. This is its raw material. There are some important omissions in this book which can't be helped. My biggest regret is never having had the chance to speak to Johnny Nash, whose influence on the Wailers from 1968 to 1972 is crucial to understanding the artist that Bob became. Bunny Wailer makes some astounding charges in these pages, and I tried over the decades to get Mr. Nash to respond. His people replied, as this book was about to go to press, "Over the many years that there have been numerous accounts of that time frame, John's posture has and continues to be that of not dignifying them with any sort of response. It would not serve a meaningful purpose other than giving a false platform to get attention. Those events are a part of history. They cannot be relived, and those who were part of creating the historical events of that era know the truth. Debating on any level for John would be counterproductive to serve a purpose for whoever's views are not on point. With all that being said, John sends his appreciation for your concerns of misgivings and wanting to give him a voice, but it's really not his style. He prefers to remain silent and let the records speak for themselves." Regardless, Johnny Nash has my utmost respect and admiration for his incredibly important work in exposing reggae to the masses and making vital contributions that molded Bob and the Wailers into finest quality international entertainers. There has never been an artist like Bob Marley, the artist of the century. His works are more popular than ever, with Forbes magazine listing him at number 5 among the highest-earning dead celebrities for 2014. Bob was psychic, and he declared that his work would last forever. It was just one of his many prophecies, some of which have yet to manifest. His abilities were recognized in 1976 by the Jamaican poet and author Geoffrey Philp, who wrote about meeting Bob for the first time at the Mona Heights Community Center in Kingston, and reconfirmed them to me at a Marley seminar in Florida in 2015. When I got there, Bob was sitting under an acacia tree. I walked up to him, introduced myself, and he told me to sit down. This was the first time I had experienced Bob's so-called psychic ability, because he began to tell me things about my life that no one else, not even my mother, knew about me. I still don't remember the details because I was in a state of shock. I just couldn't believe that anyone, upon meeting me within the space of 5 minutes, could have told me so much about my life. Here now, his closest friends and associates tell you about the life of the Bob Marley they encountered. As one of the early readers of this manuscript observed, "After reading this, I feel like I really know the man. My hope is that you will too." Chapter 1. Where is My Mother? Roger Steffens. Cedella Malcolm Marley Booker, Bob Marley's mother, was 18 at the time of his birth. Her white husband, born in Clarendon, Jamaica, was named Norval Marley. He was around 64 when Nesta Robert Marley was born on February 6, 1945, in a tiny rural village called 9 Mile, which had no electricity or running water. Christopher Marley, a member of the white Marley family, has spent years tracing Bob's bloodline and has been sharing his research with me as new discoveries come to light, debunking many of the false claims that continue to this day, including the idea that Norval was born in England and was an army officer. Christopher Marley. Bob Marley's father was Norval Sinclair Marley, born to a British father and a colored mother. Norval was not a sea captain, nor was he a quartermaster or captain or officer in the British Army. He was a ferro-cement engineer. His British Army discharge papers show that he worked in various labor corps in the UK during the First World War and was discharged as a private. He did not see active service on the battlefield. Norval Marley's family was not Syrian, as has been suggested. He was a restless, wandering man. He traveled and worked all over the world at a time when travel was not the simple thing it is today, to Cuba, the UK, Nigeria, and South Africa. He was supervising the subdivision of some rural land in St. Anne Parish for war veteran housing.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?